Vivian Marsh was 41 years old when she told her husband of 11 years that she had lost everything, and watched him start packing before she had finished the sentence. She had not lost anything. Not a single dollar, not a single contract, not a single share of the portfolio she had been building quietly since she was 26 years old. The business was intact. The accounts were intact. The trust her father had structured for her before his death was intact, and that trust alone was worth more than Raymond Marsh had ever understood her to be worth. What Vivian had lost was the willingness to keep pretending she didn't see what she saw, and she had decided that the cleanest way to confirm what she already knew was to give Raymond a door and watch whether he walked through it. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That was how long it took. She had timed it on the clock above the kitchen stove, the one she had hung herself when they moved into the house in Charlotte 9 years ago, because she was the one who hung things in this house, who built things, who planned things, who kept the maintenance schedule and the contractor relationships and the renovation timeline that had turned a distressed 1960s colonial into the kind of house real estate agents described as a showcase property. She had done it the way she did everything, methodically, without announcing herself, letting the work speak. Raymond had taken her announcement of financial ruin and converted it into a packing decision in the time it takes most people to decide what to order for lunch. What Raymond did not know, what he had spent 11 years not knowing because he had never once thought to ask, was that Vivian held a logistics director position at a regional freight company that was a visible piece of what she did, and that beneath it she was a silent majority shareholder in 3 businesses, including the freight company itself, that she had been building through holding structures her father's attorney had helped her establish before Raymond was ever in the picture. He knew she was comfortable. He had never investigated the difference between comfortable and what she actually was. He was about to find out, but not the way he expected. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Arbor Ridge Drive was the kind of house that looked like it had always been that way, which was the highest compliment Vivian knew how to give a renovation. She had bought it as a distressed property 9 years ago, before she and Raymond were married, and she had put 18 months into it before she let anyone else live inside it. She had project managed the entire scope herself, from the foundation inspection to the kitchen tile, to the wraparound porch she had designed with a contractor she trusted and had since used on 2 other projects. Every surface in that house had been a decision she made. Every decision had been made correctly. Her father used to say that the difference between a good plan and a great one was that a great plan accounted for what happened when the other person didn't do what you expected. He had been a freight logistics man himself, 32 years running a regional carrier out of Greensboro, and he had meant it as business advice. Vivian had understood it as a principle of living. She had applied it to everything since she was old enough to plan anything. He had died 4 years ago, in February, during a winter that was harder than most. She kept his photograph on the bookshelf she had built herself in the 2nd bedroom that served as her home office. The room Raymond never had reason to go into because Vivian had arranged things over the years in a way that made his curiosity unnecessary. You did not need to lock a room if you had structured a life in which the other person never thought to look. She had met Raymond at a logistics industry dinner in 2013 in a hotel ballroom in downtown Charlotte that was too cold in the way hotel ballrooms are always too cold, and that smelled of the particular combination of industrial carpet and catered chicken that defined that kind of evening. She had gone because her father had asked her to represent the company in his absence, and because she never declined a request from her father when he was the one making it. Raymond had been at the adjacent table and had introduced himself with the ease of a man who had never once found an introduction difficult. He was a mid-level operations manager, personable and confident, the kind of man who moved through a room as though he assumed it was interested in him. Which enough rooms had been that the assumption had calcified into something resembling a personality trait. He had been charming in the early years. He had asked good questions and remembered the answers and made her feel, for a while, that he saw her specifically, and not just what she represented. He had met her father twice before her father died, and her father had been polite about it, which was the version of lukewarm her father deployed when he had reservations he chose not to articulate. She had thought about that politeness in the years since. She understood it now, the way you understand a forecast after the weather has already come. Her other phone, the one connected to the holding entities and to Howard and to Claudette, stayed in the second bedroom in a drawer that Raymond had never opened, because Raymond had never been a person who looked at things he hadn't already decided were worth looking at. It was the central flaw in him, she had come to understand. Not malice, not stupidity. A specific and costly incuriosity about things he had already categorized. He had categorized her as the woman with the freight company and the house on Arbor Ridge, and the good income and the quiet temperament. He had not looked past the category. He had not asked what was behind it. That feeling, the feeling of being seen, had a half-life she had chosen not to calculate until she had to. She had noticed the first signs 2 years ago, when Raymond's relationship to their shared finances began showing the fingerprints of a man who was preparing a surface for later use. He asked questions he had never asked before about her accounts, her income, her business arrangements, questions framed as interests that felt, when she ran them back in her mind, more like surveying. He wanted to understand the topography. He was mapping something. He was not subtle about it in the way a subtle person wouldn't be. He was subtle about it in the way a person is when they believe the other person isn't paying attention. He framed the questions inside larger conversations about retirement planning, about the house's resale value, about whether she had ever thought about bringing on a business partner who could help manage growth. The questions were dressed in the language of shared futures. They were asking about the present structure. Vivian had been paying attention since 2013. She had simply chosen not to signal that. She began keeping notes in the second bedroom, in a document that lived on an encrypted drive Raymond had no access to and no knowledge of. She dated each entry. She documented the questions with their exact phrasing, because exact phrasing was where intent lived, if you knew how to read it. She documented the pattern of absences, the Baltimore trips that increased from 2 a year to 4, the evenings when he came home later than his schedule required and offered explanations that were complete in every detail, in the way that fabricated explanations tend to be. Real explanations had loose ends, small inconsistencies, the ordinary gaps of a day that actually happened. She documented the evening, 14 months ago, when she found a burner phone in the inner pocket of Raymond's travel blazer while she was taking it to the dry cleaner. She found it because she always checked pockets before dry cleaning, because she was the kind of person who did not leave details to chance. And she returned it to the pocket without powering it on, because she was also the kind of person who did not show her hand before she was ready to play it. The phone disappeared from the blazer 4 days later, when Raymond took it to Baltimore. She documented that too. She had, by the time she designed the test, 26 months of documentation organized chronologically and cross-referenced by category. Financial questions, unexplained absences, the Baltimore pattern, the blazer, a credit card charge from a Charlotte hotel that neither of them had stayed in, which she had found on a secondary card statement she had retrieved from a mailing that Raymond had intercepted, and then, believing she had not registered its absence, had failed to fully account for. He had not understood who he was married to. That was the foundation of every mistake he had made. She had been building the test for 6 weeks before she administered it. She wanted to be certain, not in the sense that she lacked certainty, because 26 months of documentation had given her something well past certainty, but in the sense that she wanted the confirmation to exist in the real world, and not only in a folder on an encrypted drive. She wanted to see it. She had always believed that seeing a thing happen, rather than inferring it, was the difference between knowing and knowing. She had spoken with her attorney, a woman named Claudette Marsh. No relation. A coincidence that always struck Vivian as vaguely ironic. Who had practiced family law in Mecklenburg County for 22 years and who had a reputation in the legal community for being methodical in a way that judges and opposing counsel both found simultaneously reassuring and inconvenient. Claudette reviewed what Vivian brought her across a conference table on a rainy Tuesday morning and was quiet for a longer time than most attorneys permitted themselves in a client meeting. Then she looked up and asked 4 questions, all of them precise, all of them relevant, none of them ones Vivian couldn't answer completely. When Vivian had answered the 4th, Claudette said, "You've done my job for me. I just need to put the structure around it." She had also, in the 3 weeks prior, commissioned a private investigation through a firm Claudette used regularly, led by a woman who had spent 15 years in corporate fraud investigation before going independent. The investigation had confirmed the Baltimore connection, including the address of a woman named Andrea, who worked in financial services, whose relationship with Raymond appeared to have begun, based on communications records obtained through proper legal discovery, approximately 19 months ago, 3 months before Raymond began asking Vivian detailed questions about her business structure. The sequence mattered. The sequence always mattered. Her father had taught her that too. You didn't look at transactions in isolation. You looked at what happened before them and what happened after them, and you let the sequence tell you what the individual moments couldn't. Vivian had said to Claudette at the end of that meeting, "There is only one possible outcome. I just need to see it happen in front of me." Claudette had said, "Then let's make sure everything is ready for whichever morning it happens on." She had also spoken with Bertrice, who listened to the entire account over the phone on a Sunday evening, and was quiet for a moment and then said, with the unhurried certainty of a person who has been holding a thought for a very long time, "I saw this in him at your wedding rehearsal. I decided it wasn't my place to say it. I have regretted that ever since." Vivian told her she had nothing to regret. Some things a person had to see for themselves. Bertrice understood that. She said she would come to Charlotte the week after, and she came. She chose a Tuesday evening in October. Raymond came home at 6:43. She was in the kitchen when he came in, standing at the counter with a glass of water she wasn't drinking. She had left the overhead light off and used only the under-cabinet lights, which she had installed herself and which threw a specific quality of light across the kitchen that she had always liked and which now served the additional purpose of making her expression harder to read. She waited until he had set down his bag and opened the refrigerator and established the rhythms of his arrival. Then she said his name. He looked at her. She said, "I need to tell you something." She watched his face recalibrate into the configuration of attentiveness. He came to the kitchen island and stood across from her with the expression of a man prepared to be supportive in whatever way required the least from him. She said, "I lost the company." She said it plainly, without setup, the way you say something you have decided you are going to say and no longer need to find a way into. She watched him. The first thing that moved in his face was not concern. It moved through something faster, a calculation, before landing on something approximating distress. She knew the difference between a face performing distress and a face experiencing it. She had made her living in part on knowing that difference. He said, "What do you mean, you lost it?" She said, "The freight company. The audit found a structural issue in the holding arrangement. The liability exceeded the insured value. The attorneys are saying we're looking at a total loss." She paused. "And the investment accounts are frozen pending the outcome." She had written that language herself, and it was designed to sound like exactly what someone who had absorbed devastating news and had moved into mechanical reporting mode would say. It sounded that way because she understood what that mode actually sounded like, because she had been in it before when her father called her from the hospital in February of the year he died and described his prognosis in the same measured, rearranged voice. Raymond said, "How much?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What do you need?" Not, "We will figure this out together." How much? She told him a number. She said it as though it hurt to say it. It did not hurt to say it because it was not real. But she said it with the weight of something real, and she watched him receive it. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, he was in the bedroom. She had followed quietly to the hallway and stood where she could see through the gap in the door without being visible in it. He had the large suitcase open on the bed. He was moving between the closet and the case with the efficiency of someone who had thought about this moment before this moment arrived. He was not crying. He was not on the phone with anyone who might help her. He was packing with the practiced economy of a man executing a plan. She had her answer. She did not go into the room. She went back to the kitchen and sat down at the table and felt, with some precision, the shape of 11 years clarifying into something she could finally see all the way around. It was not grief exactly. It was the particular sensation of a load-bearing question finally resolved. She thought of her father. She thought, "He would have given me the same answer in 45 seconds, and the other 3 minutes and 15 seconds he would have called a grace period." She was done extending grace periods. She called Claudette from the kitchen table, quietly, while Raymond continued packing. She said, "Tonight." Claudette said, "I'll have the paperwork ready by morning." She called her oldest friend, a woman named Bertrice, who had known Vivian since they were 9 years old, sharing a desk in a Greensboro classroom, and who now ran an interior design practice in Raleigh and had never, in 32 years, given Vivian anything but complete honesty when she asked for it. Bertrice said, "Finally." She said it without satisfaction, only relief. The way you say finally when something has been taking too long and you are waiting without being able to help. She also called the man who managed her holding structure, a quiet, precise attorney named Howard who had worked with her father and had transferred that relationship to Vivian with the same discretion he had always operated with. She told him what she had done and what had happened and what she needed in the morning. He said the documentation was current as of the last quarter review, and he would have everything organized and available by 9. By 8:30, Raymond was at the kitchen table with a bag by the door and the expression of a man composing his exit. He said he was sorry. He said the pressure had been building for a long time. He said he thought some space would be good for both of them, which was the kind of language a person used when they wanted to reframe abandonment as mutual consideration. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Before you go, I want to show you something." She opened the folder she had placed on the counter before he came home. Inside it was a single-page summary that Howard had prepared for her 6 days ago, updated for the quarter, showing the current structure of the holding entities and their aggregate value. She placed it on the table in front of Raymond. She said, "I didn't lose anything." She let him read it. She had given Howard specific instructions about how the summary should be organized, Total structure value at the top. Entity breakdown below. The trust line last, because the trust line was the number she wanted him to arrive at with some momentum behind him. The way you read a page, and the last sentence is the one that stays. Howard had understood without requiring her to explain the reasoning. She watched Raymond's face perform the full sequence of what a face does when the ground underneath it stops being what it was. The sequence took longer than 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Some processes moved faster in one direction than the other. She said, "The freight company is sound. The investment accounts are unrestricted. The trust my father established is performing as designed. The story I told you was a question, Raymond. You answered it in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I wrote down the time." He started to speak. He was reaching for the version of himself that could negotiate. She said, "Claudette Marsh has the filing from this morning. The documentation she has includes 2 years of behavioral records I've been keeping, a forensic summary of our joint account transactions for the past 18 months, and the findings from the investigation she commissioned in August regarding the activities on a secondary phone registered to a Baltimore address." She paused. "I know about Andrea. I know when it started. I know that it started 3 months before you began asking me about my business structure, which means I know what the asking was actually about." The room was very quiet. The clock above the stove measured it. She closed the folder. She slid it back across the table to her side and picked it up and held it against her chest the way you hold something that belongs to you. She said, "The car is yours. The rest of the asset division is in the filing. Claudette will be in touch this week." She stood. She walked to the back door, the one that opened onto the wraparound porch she had designed and built and painted the right shade of blue-gray after 3 rounds of samples. And she stepped outside into the October evening and breathed the cool air of her own backyard and looked at the garden along the fence line where the last of the season's flowers were finishing their run. She did not look back. The porch boards were solid under her feet. She had inspected every one before they were laid. She had built things that held. 14 months passed the way time passes after a structure is brought down correctly, not in collapse, but in a planned and systematic clearing that makes room for what comes next. Vivian's freight company opened a second regional hub in Raleigh in the spring. Expanding operations into a corridor her father had always believed was the right move, and that she had been positioning toward for 3 years. The opening was quiet, the way her best decisions always were. A ribbon, a small gathering, Bertrice in the front row because Bertrice had driven down from Raleigh just to be there, and had stood with her hands clasped and a look on her face that said, "This is what we were waiting for." The divorce had finalized in March. Raymond had retained private counsel who had reviewed the documentation Claudette presented and had recommended, privately, that Raymond accept the terms without extended litigation. The 2 years of behavioral records, the forensic account summary, the Baltimore investigation, assembled together, they constituted a picture no reasonable person would choose to dispute in a courtroom. He had accepted the terms. He had left Charlotte by April, relocated to a sales position in a mid-sized company in Richmond that paid a fraction of what he had believed his life would continue to cost. His mother had sent Vivian a card in May. It said only that she was sorry and that she hoped Vivian was well. Vivian read it twice and placed it on the bookshelf beside her father's photograph and left it there. There was a man named Elias, a civil engineer she had met through a professional association conference in Raleigh in June. He was methodical and unhurried, and asked good questions and did not perform confidence. He simply had it, the kind that came from knowing your work and trusting it. He had toured the new Raleigh hub at her invitation in August and spent 45 minutes asking questions about load logistics that demonstrated he was genuinely curious about how the operation worked. and she had found that she was genuinely glad to answer. They had dinner after. She was not in a rush about any of it. She had never been in a rush about anything worth doing correctly. On a Saturday morning in November, she was on the wraparound porch with coffee, the garden past its season, the yard settling into the quiet of late autumn, the porch board solid and gray-blue under her feet. She had a call with Howard at 10. She had lunch with Bertrice at noon. She had a life built along load-bearing lines that she had engineered herself and that had proved, under direct pressure, to hold exactly as she had designed it to hold. She pressed the coffee mug between both palms and watched the morning come across the yard. Her father would have asked her, "Does the plan account for what happens when the other person doesn't do what you expect?" She thought, "Yes. I planned for exactly what he did." She was free. She was solvent. She was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.